The Breton Gordon had been following the strange reports of new chemical attacks in Syria, and he had a theory. If Assad was indeed using chlorine as a weapon, the colonel reasoned, then Syria was playing a cruel and cynical game. Assad was making a public show of giving up his arsenal of deadly nerve agents, but his soldiers had merely switched to a different kind of poison gas. This one, a common industrial chemical that Syria was legally permitted to possess. Chlorine is far less deadly than sarin, but it can be a weapon of terror just the same. It was the first lethal chemical weapon used by European armies in the trenches of World War I, before the discovery of frightful new substances such as mustard gas. Later, the drafters of chemical weapons treaties decided against including chlorine on their lists of banned substances, since it was impractical to ask countries to get rid of it. The use of any asphyxiating gas as a weapon was technically illegal, but no modern army had contemplated using chlorine on the battlefield in nearly a century. For Assad, though, the intended targets were not trench works or infantrymen. They were apartment buildings and bomb shelters filled with civilians. To be successful, the attack need not kill everyone. It just had to generate enough victims to cause panic and clear out rebel neighborhoods so Syrian troops could move in. It's brilliant, the Breton Gordon said. Low casualty but psychologically effective. The Syrians had found the perfect loophole. No one had asked Assad to give up his chlorine, and he had plenty of it, including thousands of canisters of Chinese made stuff purchased from legitimate suppliers. If chlorine killed fewer people, it was actually a good thing. Fewer casualties meant fewer images of dead and dying children creating a spectacle on social media. Moreover, chlorine's rapid degradation would make it harder to prove that the chemical was ever used. But evidence could be found if a trained specialist managed to get to the crime scene quickly enough and with the right tools. Anyone attempting to do so in this case would have to cross disputed terrain patrolled by government helicopters, snipers, Islamist militants, and armed gangs. Al Nahas was willing to risk it. On a morning in mid April, he and his two friends met in southern Turkey and climbed into a car with an ice chest they had packed with empty laboratory vials and plastic bags. Then they drove into Syria to see what they could find. The first to die had been the birds, the chickens and pigeons in their roosts, but also wild swallows and sparrows that were caught in the path of the poison cloud and fell to the ground in clumps of two or three. Next came the smaller mammals, the goats, sheep, and feral cats, that lasted a few minutes or perhaps up to an hour. One family's cow lingered for 8 hours, wheezing pitifully as she slowly drowned from a buildup of fluid in her lungs. Al Nahas took photos of the animals and of the ugly red gouge in the earth where a barrel bomb had landed just behind a farmer's house in Talmenes. He took a deep breath. The faint odor of bleach was still detectable a day after the attack. The owner of the house had been taken to Al Nahas's hospital for treatment, so the young doctor had already recorded his story before starting his trip. The farmer had been home on the day of the attack, caring for his invalid wife and several grandchildren, when they heard the passing helicopter followed by a whistling sound like that of a falling bomb. But instead of an explosion, there had been only a jarring thud. He tried to calm his family, telling them that the bomb had missed them. "It was far away from us, so don't worry," the man said. But then came an overpowering chemical smell, and the grandchildren began to cough and choke. In a panic, he rushed them into the bathroom, closed the door, and turned on the shower, forcing each child to stand under the water in the hope that it would dilute the effects of whatever poison they were breathing. Having accomplished that, he ran to help his wife, who was 65 and too frail to move on her own. The woman was struggling as though someone was suffocating her. By the time the family arrived at the local clinic, she was unconscious. Later, Al Nahas learned the woman died. Al Nahas left the farmer's house and continued to trace the cloud's path eastward. Where the chlorine plume had passed, there was a dead wake of scorched and shriveled plants, corroded metal, and strangely discolored fabrics. Eventually, the trail led to a culvert in a nearby olive grove where families sometimes sought shelter during air raids. The poison had settled in this low spot, and two young children who were hiding there with their families became gravely ill from the fumes. Both later died. In each of the stricken towns, Al-Nahas and his friends easily found the remnants of the bombs themselves. Using the specimen kits they brought from Turkey, they recorded the exact locations with GPS equipment and scooped up metal fragments and a few tablespoons of soil, placing each sample in a separate plastic bag inside the ice chest. The steel tanks that held the poison were ripped open but mostly intact. Still visible on each were three characters engraved on the side of the metal casing: CL2. It was a chemical symbol for chlorine gas.